Everyone. It's so great to see so many people here. My name is Claire Seckler Merkel, and I'm the president of the Phoenix Committee on Foreign Relations and senior director of Arizona programs at the McCain Institute at ASU. Thank you so much for joining our program today. It's wonderful to see so many friends on the screen. The Phoenix Committee on Foreign Relations is Arizona's premier foreign relations organization dedicated to growing Arizona's global prominence by providing forums that explore critical foreign policy issues and build enduring international connections. Today's program is the perfect example of our mission in action. We are thrilled to host this very timely program in partnership with the Malikian Center at ASU and the Santa Fe Council on International Relations. Please look to the events page on our website at pcfraz.org for all upcoming programs online and in person. This week, our members are reading author Robert Kaplan's Warrior Politics for the January reading group. On February 1st, we look forward to a virtual discussion with author Bruce Bueno de Mesquita on his book, The Invention of Power, Popes, Kings, and the Birth of the West, again with our friends at the Santa Fe Council. We are thrilled to welcome former Defense Secretary Mark Esper for a program in person at the ASU Law School on February 15th as part of our new series on great power competition, hosted in conjunction with the McCain Institute and ASU Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law. Secretary Esper's program is free and open to the public. Save the date for Steve Miska on March 10th. There will be a dinner program at the Phoenix Country Club. It just went up on our website. If you are a guest today and would like to know more about joining PCFR, please take a look at the website and feel free to reach out to me directly or any of our members. We'd love to have you join us. Before we get started, I want to make sure that I thank our sponsors for making the work that we do possible. Our title sponsor, Freeport-McMoRan, our diamond sponsor, the Arizona Commerce Authority, our media sponsor, KJZZ, our platinum sponsors, ASU Sandra Day O'Connor Law School, the McCain Institute, Snell & Wilmer, W.R. Schultz Investments, Thunderbird School of Global Management, our gold sponsors, Salt River Project, APS, South 32, Noble Community Activators, ASU Malikian Center for Russian, Eurasian, and East European Studies, and our silver sponsors, Spencer Fain, Wallace Pless and Dreyer, Chicanos por la Causa, Resolution Copper, City of Peoria, and Visit Phoenix. I would also like to give a special thanks to our international visionary donor, Ellen Schultz, and lifetime benefactors whose generous monetary gifts allow PCFR to fulfill our mission. Keith Galbett, Charles Irion, Karen Meyer, JP Mion, Shoshana Tanser, and Melissa Sands. A special thank you to PCFR member Vlad Simbayu for bringing Ambassador Krol to us today. One point of housekeeping, please go ahead and put your questions in the chat, and our moderator, Jim Falk, will ask them on your behalf after the speakers have done their introductions. So with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce our speakers today. Ambassador George Krol retired from the U.S. Foreign Service in November 2018, concluding a 36-year diplomatic career with his final assignment as U.S. Ambassador to Kazakhstan. He has spent the last 30 years serving in states that emerged from the former Soviet Union, such as Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Uzbekistan, and Kazakhstan. He held ambassadorships to Uzbekistan, Belarus, and served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State responsible for Central Asia. He is currently an adjunct professor at the U.S. Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, and lectures frequently on foreign policy topics to local audiences. He is also an associate fellow at Harvard University's Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies. David Merkel is the managing director of Summit International Advisors. His expertise includes U.S. foreign policy, the geopolitics of energy, the Belt and Road Initiative, Europe, Russia, the Caucasus, and Central Asia. David has decades of experience in the region, having served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs and Director for South and Central Asian Affairs at the National Security Council in the White House, and living in Moscow for 2 years. He is a founding and current board member of the Nazarbayev University in Nur-Sultan, Kazakhstan. His passion is definitely Central Asia, and our children could name all of the stand countries and find them on a map long before they could count all 50 states. He's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, International Institute for Strategic Studies, and the Phoenix Committee on Foreign Relations. He also serves as president of the Malikian Center Advisory Board at ASU. So with that, I welcome you both and turn it over to you, David.
Thank you very much, and it's a real pleasure to be with George. A foreign service officer can count his career as a success if at the end he can count himself as an ambassador in some sleepy corner of the world. George, as Claire mentioned, served as ambassador in 3 different very challenging countries at 3 very important times. It's worth noting that he was in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan when those countries were so crucial to the global war on terrorism and diversifying global sources of energy. And Belarus is always a challenge. George and I were colleagues in the Maine State Department, and we were just talking earlier about the many conversations that we would have in Kazakhstan. So right at the beginning, George, I'd love for you to just share with the audience a bit about the challenges that the countries of the former Soviet Union face today, and how the 30 years from the breakup of the Soviet Union to where we are today, how it looks to you.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me from far away here in Rhode Island, where I am, to join you. I would just say, when you mentioned about challenging assignments that I had abroad in the ambassadorships I had and the like, I always felt the most challenging assignment is the ones you have in Washington, because as you well know, David, being a Washington creature in a way, those can be the most difficult and challenging issues you have to deal with, is domestically and within the interagency of the United States government. But having said that, I did have the I guess the unenviable or enviable position of having been in the Soviet Union when it collapsed I was there in Leningrad, what was then called Leningrad, from 1990 to 1992, and covering the Baltic republics out of that part of the Soviet Union when it all collapsed. I did meet and work with Vladimir Putin at the time when he emerged in St. Petersburg as sort of the quote unquote foreign minister of St. Petersburg and the like. And then I was sent down and served in our embassy in Kiev, which was just opening in 1992 to 1993. And then I went up to Belarus, where I was served as the deputy chief of mission and then charge at the time, the head of the mission, when Alexander Lukashenko first got elected president of Belarus. And subsequent to that, I went back to Washington, where I worked in the then office of the ambassador at large for the new independent states, which was how the State Department was had designed itself and planned to deal with this area of the former Soviet Union, which didn't include the Baltic republics for largely political reasons and the like, but also which gave me the opportunity to travel with Ambassador Collins, who was the ambassador at large at the time in the early 90s, through Central Asia, for instance, the Caucasus, and of course Russia. I then, for my sins, was made director of Russian affairs at the State Department during the whole period when the Balkan crises were going on. And then for those things, in the year 1999, I then was sent to Moscow to be the head of the political section there, where I witnessed Boris Yeltsin hand over power to my St. Petersburg interlocutor, Vladimir Putin, who became president of the Russian Federation. And after that, and so there was that transition. I was there for 2001, the 9/11 crisis that brought the United States and Russia together, and the United States actually physically, militarily into Central Asia, and then went on to go back to Washington, where then I became Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Central Asian Affairs, and then on to overseas to Uzbekistan, and finally to Kazakhstan. So it went, those 30 years or so have gone by very quickly, but I've been, as it were, a witness and to some extent a participant in even the way the United States policies evolve, but also following developments in this whole area of the world. And I would say that again, I could go on at great length about how these whole areas have developed, but to put it briefly, of course, these countries, emerged out of being part of one big country that was very centralized in control. But they all had many ticking time bombs in their republics, both by borders, by ethnic groups that had put together by the Soviet authorities as means of controlling the populations and the ethnic groups that were all a part of the Soviet Union. So when they all became independent, these republics that were never created to be independent were faced with the challenge of building themselves as independent countries with institutions that they had. They didn't have militaries and foreign ministries for the most part, except the Russian Federation, which inherited that infrastructure and those institutions from the Soviet Union, having its capital in Moscow. But also these were states now that had to have their own domestic policies and economic policies and foreign policies. And the leaderships in those early days were, these were not really revolutionaries for the most part, but these were basically many of the Communist Party authorities that had been in charge when the place disappeared one fine day at the end of December in 1991. And so they were faced with this situation, really in many respects not of their own choosing. And they've all developed in different ways, but it is important to realize that each of these countries and their leaderships came out of a Soviet system with many, and the bureaucracies that were there that had to deal with all of this came out of the Soviet bureaucracies, and also the economic situation they all faced was a collapse of a centralized economic system. I remember you couldn't have, there was not fuel, there were issues of food, communications and transportation, and all the networks and webs that had been constructed over the entire years. We're talking about 70 years in most cases of the creation of the Soviet Union, were all broken in many respects and creating chaos and disorder and also even vestiges of famine and great hardships where currencies had to be created in addition to everything else that had to be created. And it was truly amazing how these societies and these leaderships were able to adapt to this tremendous wrenching experience, which I think is very difficult for Americans to understand. So we're seeing this 30 years later, how these things have come about.
No, I think that's a good context, and it is important to point out that it's just been 30 years, and the situation in post-colonial Middle East or Africa or even in our own hemisphere has great difficulties with democracy and transparency and corruption. I wonder if we can drill down on a couple of countries, Kazakhstan and then Ukraine, and then perhaps talk about what game Vladimir Putin is playing, and perhaps how the U.S., the West, should respond. I think that a great number of people were surprised about what has happened in Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan has greatly benefited from stability in Central Asia. It has been their marker to attract foreign investment, and they have been quite successful. They've also it's where President Xi introduced the Belt Road Initiative, and they have a large dry dock facility on the border with China in Hormuz. So when Xi talks about the road belt of the Belt Road Initiative, it is talking about through Kazakhstan, China links up with Europe. Nevertheless, a protest over the increase of price of gas resulted in thousands arrested, and official estimates of a couple of hundred killed, although friends in country say that those that are missing and just the numbers in the morgues in Almaty suggest that the death toll will be much, much higher. People who are being released from detention are having to sign a non-disclosure agreement as a condition of their release. So if they say anything about whether or not they were tortured or what they were questioned about, they could quickly be round back up. President Tokayev, when he was foreign minister, used to talk about the importance of a balanced foreign policy between the U.S. and Russia and China. I wonder if you can share with us how you see the events in Kazakhstan and Tokayev either inviting Russian troops in or responding to the offer of Russian troops to come in. How does this poise Kazakhstan for its balanced foreign policy, for its attractiveness for investment, and also is it a place where there could be possible increased tension between Russia and China?
Thank you. Yes, I've been following developments in Kazakhstan since I left, and these demonstrations then morphed into countrywide, as I understand, demonstrations that took on a very violent turn, particularly in the largest city, Almaty, which is all the way on the other side of the country. People should realize that Kazakhstan is an immense country. It's the 9th largest in the world, and most of their wealth comes from the oil that is pumped out of Western Kazakhstan through consortia that are run largely by American headquartered energy companies like Chevron and ExxonMobil and the like. And the demonstrations that started out in the beginning of January over the increase of natural gas prices were not unusual, because there have been demonstrations in that area of Kazakhstan even 10 years ago, which had resulted in violence, including with deaths. And the government tried to respond to these demands of lowering prices and the like by lowering the prices, and thinking that is their kind of tried and true method of when you're facing this kind of a demonstration that may be growing, is that you meet the demands and then try to quiet it that way. But this did not happen insofar as it may have quelled the disturbances in the east. The western part of Kazakhstan, but the demonstrations against the government, as it were, and not just prices of increase in prices. It seemed to galvanize a feeling of discontent among a lot of people, particularly in the largest city, Almaty, and the like, that has been pent up over some time. And Kazakhstan's own development as its politics and its economics had led really to a very deeply unequitable system where there are very, very wealthy people, and then there's a whole mass of people who aren't that wealthy. And if you look at all the figure of how wealthy Kazakhstan is, it looks very good on paper. But if you divided it up per capita, it also looks like the wealthiest country in Central Asia, at least. But when you see how the wealth has been distributed, and as even President Tokayev has pointed out, citing outside sources, that most of the wealth is in the hands of 162 people. And many Kazakhstanis were aware of this, and they would complain about it, that they couldn't really do anything about it. And demonstrations about this were quickly put down, and there were many laws passed to basically restrict demonstrations and also internet interaction in order to quell what you could see could be a rising or a connective tissue of discontent throughout much of the countryside, as people were seeing their incomes under stress with COVID, with inflation, things of this matter, and yet they would see the very, very wealthy in the eastern part of the country having multiple homes and living very, very high off the hog, as it were. So this is an issue that was long developing, but it took on, it seems, and from speaking with people that I know there, a conflict among the ruling elite in Kazakhstan. That Nazarbayev, who had formally given up the presidency, still remained the leader of the nation. He ran the Security Council, and many people felt he was still running the country, and that President Tokayev, who he had handpicked to replace him, was more of a creature of Nazarbayev, but that perhaps as a result of this upheaval, particularly in Almaty, was there an effort by a group around Nazarbayev to basically, end the tenure of Tokayev, or is it of Tokayev seizing an opportunity to remove the power of Nazarbayev and his family and those around him? There are various versions. I mean, also that both Nazarbayev and Tokayev had been up in Moscow just before all of this started, and was there any kind of a discussion with the Russians and other leaders about a change in Kazakhstan, and were the results of that, when they came back to Kazakhstan, somehow factoring in to the violence and the efforts that we saw took place. So there you see many layers and levels of conflict and intrigue that we may never know exactly what happened. But it seems at the end of the day, Nazarbayev is and his clan, if you will, are completely out. Tokayev is in a strong position, and calling in the, if you will, the Russians or the Collective Security Treaty Organization is it can be seen as ensuring the security forces of Kazakhstan, which were led by a man you and I both knew, Karim Asimov, who was very close to Nazarbayev, had been his prime minister, had been his very close to him, was the head of this organization, and was this the calling in, as it were, of the outside force to basically show to the security forces and the establishment that Tokayev has the backing of the largest country that Kazakhstan is deeply entwined with, and for its security and for its economics.
When
Kazakhstan is an ally of Russia and is a member of a economic union with Russia, and that shouldn't be lost on it. So there are many layers to this that we are seeing and have seen in Kazakhstan.
I've met with President Tokayev many times, as have you, over the years, and I'm reminded of a meeting when he was foreign minister back in 2006, after he had a meeting in the White House, and he mentioned that Kazakhstan was just a flea between two elephants, the elephants being China and Russia, and he was making the point of the importance of the relationship with the United States, and obviously the United States being out of Afghanistan, and Tokayev receiving Russian troops as a source of his legitimacy. One thing is clear, whether that Tokayev has said it was a result of 10,000 terrorists that we can't find any sign of, although there was an unfortunate Kyrgyz jazz musician who sported a beard that was seen to be a terrorist, or it was an American attempt at a color revolution, or it was an attempted coup. It seems pretty clear, as you said at the beginning, that it was the people who had seen their lives not get better but get worse over the last 5 years, and they were protesting a massive increase in a staple of their life for gas. Just before we move on from this, is there anything the United States can do, or does Putin feel like with Tokayev he has Kazakhstan safely in his pocket?
Well, I think that for Russia, Kazakhstan was always pretty safely in its pocket. Even President Nazarbayev, who I met frequently, would indicate that they needed to be smart because you mentioned the flea between two elephants, but they have this huge border with Russia. They have 20% of the population of Kazakhstan living along that border, largely are ethnically Russian. And you have China on the other side, a country that is also can be a threat to Kazakhstan because of not only China's actions in Western China, where there are Kazakhs and Uyghurs and Turkic peoples that have been caught up in China's activities there, but that for Kazakhstan to maintain its field of maneuver and its independence, it had to have this multi-vectoral foreign policy of being very close to Russia and allied to Russia, but also having a friendly and economic relation with China, and that the Americans were sort of, a good thing to have also for Kazakhstan's image, for the technology they could get in exploiting their oil resources, and to have these three major power areas that you're friendly with. You could see it makes a lot of sense. But when push comes to shove, when there is a conflict and confrontation between the United States and Russia, as there has been over these years, as well as now the United States and China, Kazakhstan doesn't have that much of a field to maneuver in. And I know when I was there, their fear was that they were going to be asked by us to choose who is your friend, the United States or Russia. And at the end of the day, they know which side they have to for their own existential being has to be with Russia. And they also look to Russia as being their ultimate supporter and security guarantor vis-a-vis the Chinese, who they fear probably more so than any of them because of the size of China and the feeling that Chinese are really foreign. They've been used to dealing with Russians. They were part of the Soviet Union for all that time. But for the United States, I believe that they use it as a hedge. But, and I think, as you mentioned, when the United States basically has left the region, leaving Afghanistan, the like, they know that the United States doesn't really have the power or the influence that could really weighed in the balance in favor of Kazakhstan, particularly in their relationship with either China or Russia.
So George, I think probably the reason that a great number of the folks are on the call today has to do with the situation in Ukraine. The Biden administration has responded to Russia's proposal, and the Russians have said they will study it. But how do you see the situation with regard to Ukraine? What is Russia's ambitions here? Specifically, what is Putin's ambition? And how is it the best for the U.S., for NATO, for the Normandy Group, for the OSCE to counter?
Well, I think it is interesting to compare and contrast Kazakhstan and Ukraine, because the Kazakhstanis, in fact, when he was president, President Nazarbayev would even speak about this with me and others, is that they didn't want to end up like Ukraine. I mean, they have a big neighbor that is vitally important to them economically, and they have a large population of Russians and Russian speakers in the country. And their attitude, that is the Kazakhstani attitude, is we can't change our geography, we can't change our neighbor, we have to live with it, and better to have them as friendly than being hostile. And they have often would feel that the Ukrainians are just playing this very wrong, because Ukrainians can't change their geography, they can't change their neighbor, and they also have a large ethnic Russian-speaking population on that border with Russia, which also included Crimea and the like. And so the Kazakhstanis would feel that, well, the Ukrainians are just heading to disaster by doing things that Kazakhstan would never even think of, would be like to become a member of NATO. And Kazakhstan had friendly relations with NATO, and also with the EU. It's one of their biggest trading partners, but they never indicated that they would ever want to be an alliance or be a part of it or whatever. They wanted to be friendly with them all, and they rather felt that Ukrainians, if they were to follow this kind of a policy, this would save them from the fate that they have, in their view, brought upon themselves. So, and Nazarbayev himself was one of the ones that offered to be a mediator, because he was on good relations with Putin, and he studied in Ukraine. He knew the Ukrainians, but he was hoping that he could advise the Ukrainians, to adjust and have a different relationship with Russia, because you're not going to be able to change that fundamental fact. And being a member of NATO or the EU or whatever is not going to change it. It's just going to make a more hostile neighbor of Russia, on which Ukraine still depends on for fuel and for its economy and things of this nature. So I'd say, what we're seeing in Ukraine, at least from the Russian point of view, is the Russian view that if you were looking at Ukraine from Russia, you would see that this is right on their border. It was the heartland. It was kind of like the Midwest, of Pittsburgh and Chicago for the Soviet Union and for Russia itself. And this is extremely important for how Russia sees its security. And by seeing what it views as a hostile or another a defensive pact or a military pact as NATO, on its border, this is extremely upsetting to Russians and the Russian leadership, because of how they look at the world and how they see why does this country wish to join a organization and that is not one where they have a friendly relationship with Russia. And so therefore, Russia feels that it has to use its leverage, which is immense, having, the largest military and also in that region to, rattle the cage and also take in seeing what had happened with the Maidan in 2016, that they feared that the next step would be a Ukrainian ethnic national government, that the next thing they would do is tear up the agreement with Russia over the Black Sea Fleet and stationing in Sevastopol. And also when the Ukrainians were, leadership at that time was stripping the Russian language of official status. Well, this triggered a response that before this gets too out of hand, we have to act. And I think this motivated a lot of Russia. And what Russia has been trying to do is get not only Ukrainians serious about facing facts and making certain concessions or compromises, which the Minsk, as it were, accords would entail, and also to get the United States and Europe serious about not just Ukraine, and it isn't just all about Ukraine, but about Russia's main peeves about it being shut out of the major security structures of Europe as a whole, which it has been feeling that its concerns, its voice, its own security has been basically shunted aside largely by the United States, which focuses all of security on the preeminence of NATO, and that the Russians need to be just managed. But the Russians are saying, look, you've been telling us for so long, you have to eat your spinach. Well, now it's the Russians wanting the Americans and NATO to basically face facts and eat their spinach. So this, I think, is motivating a lot of Russia. And Ukraine is sort of is the approximate cause for what we're seeing currently today. But I think it's largely to get Americans, largely the Americans who they feel are the real power brokers, to a negotiating table where the United States can take seriously and work with Russia seriously on devising an architecture for Europe that takes into account Russia's own security needs and requirements as basically the largest, most powerful country in Europe.
It's interesting. The Biden administration, according to Jake Sullivan, had wanted to focus on the 3 C's: climate, COVID, and China. And Vladimir Putin has other plans for the Biden administration. A lot of people looking at what's happening are suggesting perhaps a mild incursion of 20 kilometers to get the canal to link up the Donbass with Crimea. That would satisfy a lot of the difficulties that Russia is having in Crimea. We have some people on the call from ASU, and I just look at this and keep on thinking about the battle between the liberal international order and realism, and what you described as far as Russia's desire for spheres of interests really kind of speaks towards looking at this as some have written on a realist mindset. But it also kind of blows through the idea of what a sovereign country is able to select for itself on what security agreements it wants to reach. Many people in Moscow, in looking about what happened in South Ossetia, Abkhazia, or Crimea, said, great, we gained this territory, but we lost Ukraine or lost Georgia, which are more concerned about Putin's assertive policy, and the fact that all countries have security concerns, but revanchist powers like Russia just can't have their security concerns satisfied. I wanted, before turning to the audience, kind of draw you out just briefly on two different things. A lot of the focus on perhaps what may satisfy this deal is more work on a nuclear weapons treaty, and perhaps some limitation of where exercises can take place. But clearly, the United States is not going to give Moscow a veto on what countries can be invited into NATO and define what is meant by NATO's open door. Although membership for Ukraine has not been an increased issue in the last decade or more, and Biden himself said that they wouldn't be ready for another decade or so. And then also, what will our response to Ukraine mean for the Indo-Pacific? One argument would say if we don't follow through with deterrence in a serious manner in Ukraine, then the countries in the region will fear that we won't follow through with deterring an aggressive attack on Taiwan. But if we spend all of our time deterring such an attack on Ukraine and making that deterrence more realistic, then perhaps we don't spend the appropriate amount of attention and resources to make a deterrence for Taiwan realistic. So as far as what concretely Putin is looking for, 20 miles in the canal or a full-blown larger war, and what does our response mean with regard to the legitimacy of our deterrence in the Indo-Pacific?
Well, to take your latter point, I think it's important to bring China into the equation, because what we're seeing globally is the convergence of Chinese and Russian feelings about the world order, and that the order that used to be, where the United States was the preeminent economic, military, political power, the only superpower, that world has changed. It's not that Russia is a major economic power, but it is a power to be reckoned with, certainly in its region, as well as in certain areas abroad. It's also still the largest country in the world, and China is now an economic powerhouse that has increased its economic reach throughout the globe, in many places surpassing the United States. And in the last 30 years ago, like when the Soviet Union collapsed, and China wasn't really considered by the United States as being a serious sort of rival or problem or whatever like that. And but China and Russia see common cause in trying to force the United States to recognize that the United States is no longer the be-all and the end-all, and that the American mindset that somehow we can resolve everything and be the policeman of the world, and that do we, the United States, have to come to a recognition that the world has changed, and so is our ability and power, if we even had it to begin with, to do the things that we think we can do to change the world in the way we would like it to be changed. And so I think that for going back to Russia and Ukraine, I frankly do not believe that the Russians are looking to have a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and even I would say an incursion of 20 miles, because they would pay a price not just of sanctions that would be imposed on them, which would be pretty severe. Then those sanctions, by the way, would also hurt European countries, and particularly Germany, I would say. But also there would be, what do you do to, how it would be a great drain on Russia, to have to run or manage Ukraine, and well as, what could be an insurgency and things of this nature too. So I don't think that as I had noted, I think the real matter is to force the issue for the Ukrainians and for the United States and Europe to come to grips. And this is attention gathering. I mean, it certainly is focused attention and diplomatic efforts by the United States to deal with Russia and deal with Russia's concerns, even if at the outset is we reject what they put forward in the first place. But what it has done, it has started perhaps a serious diplomatic effort. And I would say as a diplomat, a career diplomat, if you're successful as a diplomat, it means no one is going to be satisfied 100% with what you come about with. You know, everyone comes to the table with kind of their ultimate absolutist desires, but the very I would say difficult work of a diplomat is how do you try to nibble at the edges to come to issues that there can be compromises on, that people are good enough, that the common denominator are good enough that everyone could accept, even though no one is completely happy, and then selling that to other countries like Ukraine, and may include Ukraine and the like as well as publics, that look, no one wants to come to an out and out war and a conflict and have this, because everybody loses in that. And so therefore, where is the compromise to be had? And that is something Russia's been pushing for on European security for these many, almost 30 years, and felt that they were not getting any traction, as the US was always sort of ignoring it and saying, well, we'll have a mechanism. Yes, we can talk about it, but it was never taken seriously from the Russian point of view. And I'd have to say, as somebody who, was involved in this, I could see it even from the American side, that there was not, there were other more important issues to deal with than the Russians. And I'd have to say, even for Ukraine, Ukraine was viewed more as an irritant to the US than, a serious issue that was vital to American security. And so the Russians, have focused attention on this. And I think it's a lesson for also what the Chinese may be trying to do, is to focus attention on coming to terms with a new order that now exists, where the United States does not have, omnipotent power to change and run the world as we may have thought we.
Very good. Well, now we can turn over to our colleagues with the Santa Fe Council to bring in questions from all of you.
Thank you so much, David and Ambassador Krol, for your time. It was a very rich conversation and a lot to unpack. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator today for the Q&A, Jim Falk, who is currently the Interim Executive Director of the Santa Fe Council on International Relations, but many of you will know him from his longtime service as President of the Dallas-Fort Worth World Affairs Council and one of our partners for today's program. Over to you, Jim. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Claire. Good afternoon, everybody. So we have a number of questions, and start off with this one from Christine Wells. And it was a question that I was thinking about too. And she says, it appears in the United States media, compare it as well with the US State Department, that, or at least from the media perspective, the Ukrainians appear quite calm. You're not seeing mass demonstrations or a great deal of anguish. Is that just the way the media is reporting it, or is there something else that we're just not seeing?
Well, I think that there is a lot to that. I was just listening to a podcast about that, and this question was raised. Someone who was in Russia and someone who was also in Ukraine, and I think the sort of running around with your hands waving in the air is largely in Washington, I would say, and less so in Moscow or in Kiev or in the rest of Europe, for that matter. This has really spun up Washington big time, and I know some of the people that are on this call have been in Washington. I see Tom Simons, like old colleague of mine and the like too, is that, as you said, with Washington, there's always this flailing that goes on. And my old boss, Ambassador Jim Collins, who is later ambassador to Russia and everything, when I worked for him as ambassador at large, he would always kind of advise, let's everyone take a Valium in Washington and settle down, because you've got so many talking heads and people that are experts. I mean, look at me. I mean, I'm one of them, I guess, for you. Sorry to say, but and yet on the ground, I just don't think that, I mean, the Russians in Moscow, they just don't think there's going to be a major war. This is it's not so much theater, but it is part of the issue of getting serious. And the Ukrainians, while they are calling for, we need weapons, we need your political support and everything, they know that at the end of the day, they couldn't stand a chance if there was a concerted Russian effort to invade their country. They just don't have the territory, the terrain, everything. It would be pointless in a way. So there's a certain, and plus people there have a certain fatalistic view of the world. I mean, they've been through a lot, and also they're undergoing in Ukraine their own internal political situation. I mean, the president of Ukraine, faced with this, is extremely unpopular because it seems the majority of Ukrainians, by polls and everything, they want this situation to end. They voted into office to stop this sort of war between Russia and Ukraine. And now, the Ukrainian president is calling up his predecessor, and Poroshenko is going to be up for charges of treason and the like. And so, you have this going on in Ukraine, and many Ukrainians, I think, are feeling like, what is going on in your own country? And I don't
so when you're talking about,
I would just add a couple of things. I mean, one, it's important to point out that the journalists are talking to people in Kyiv, which is well west of where this would take place. Second, the president has called up a citizens reserve and is going to start training and arming what the press accounts say is 130,000. And as a result of Putin's actions and his rhetoric, NATO, which was not an issue in Ukraine, is far more popular, but it's far more popular in Finland and Sweden as a result of what Putin is doing. So it is something that I think that they are not as sanguine about, that the press talks about, but it is not the only thing that as George mentions, they have to deal with in their day-to-day lives.
Well, we have just a few more minutes, and I want to bring in some questions again from our audience. And this is from Peter Zim. And he goes, to what extent is the confrontation an effect of the U.S. exit from Afghanistan? And I would add to that also the change in leadership in Germany.
Well, I've had people in Eastern Europe. I teach a course at the Naval War College here in Newport, and I bring various virtual speakers from these countries to speak to my class. And I have to say that these are from, as you were, allies of the United States and the like. It was this feeling that the United States departure and how it departed from Afghanistan was, a clear message of weakness from the United States, and also a sign that the United States bit off more that it could chew. It got involved in a sort of almost a bottomless pit that they couldn't extract themselves with all sorts of reasonings behind it and the like. And so it was a very negative experience of what would be looked at as American leadership, American, and just the whole image of it too. So I think that it has had an effect on allies, and probably had an effect in Moscow and in Beijing as well. And also seeing the political divide in the United States, and and that the United States and the administration is focused on the economy and focused on the pandemic and the like. And, you know, we have a lot, the administration has, and the United States has so many, you know, irons in the fire or pots boiling and boiling over, that how can it cope with all of these, with these international issues that are coming up and absorbing the interests of the United States leadership. So I think all of this, you know, comes into play in a situation like Ukraine and dealing with China and everything.
There was a very interesting article in the New Yorker this week, and it was about what Jim Baker, former Secretary of State Baker, really meant when he said not one more inch. Is there a true misunderstanding of what was intended about where the United States, or rather the Western countries, would set up defensive posture, as well as the expansion of NATO?
Well,
If I could,
yes, I suppose
Go ahead.
there is a misunderstanding. By the way, not to say I just got a book. It says "Not 1 Inch." It's by this Mary Surratt called "America, Russia, and the Making the Post-Cold War Stalemate." And
the article, in fact, in the New Yorker drew on that.
Yeah, and it was delves very deeply into this. Baker saying to Gorbachev that NATO would not advance one inch eastward, and this was in the context of dealing with the unification of Germany. And again, this was a discussion between the United States, Baker, and Gorbachev. They had the Soviet Union. Well, the Soviet Union doesn't exist, and so anything, and there wasn't any binding agreement. It was simply a statement to assuage Gorbachev and the Soviets that, you know, there wouldn't be an effort to try to move, you know, into the Soviet Union's sort of closer to the Soviet Union. But when the Soviet Union collapsed, it's a different situation. And you had countries that are now sovereign and independent and wanting to join NATO, like the Baltic countries did very early on. But from the Russian perspective, you know, early on, since they were the heirs to the Soviet Union, they felt that what was said to Gorbachev should apply to Russia as well. And so while this is an interpretation, they strongly believe that. And whether we would say, well, no, there was no agreement, binding agreement, this was with the Soviet Union, they would say, well, that's what you say, but we take it differently. And that becomes a reality for the Russians, and certainly in their argument about this, that this was a promise that the United States reneged on. And, you know, technically speaking, no, but in the Russian mindset, it is. And then it becomes a reality in of itself you have to deal with, because you're not going to convince them otherwise by saying, you know, you're lying, or this is, you're wrong, because they'll say, well, no, we aren't. And then how do you sort of put that aside, and let's then get to the issue of you know, how NATO and Russia can live together and the like. So,
David, it looked to me like you wanted to add something there.
I think George handled it well. I think the important part is that there were agreements, that this was a statement and discussions, that there were follow-up statements and discussions between Bush and Gorbachev that moved past that. There were agreements between Yeltsin and Bush, and I agree with everything George said, but the Russians like to point out something that happened in a discussion where they signed an agreement in Bucharest that if the Ukrainians got rid of the nuclear weapons, the US, the UK, and Russia would ensure that they weren't invaded. And of course, that's something that they signed that they don't really think is that important yet. One comment by Baker to Gorbachev, they've kind of hung their hat on.
Susan Widener asked this question, and it follows an article that was in the Wall Street Journal this week, that Vladimir Putin really needs a win in Ukraine, or if he doesn't get it, his term may be shorter than we might imagine. What are your thoughts?
I don't think so. I mean, Vladimir Putin, from all accounts that I hear, I'm not in Russia, I haven't been there for some time, is he's pretty strongly situated, in Russia. He doesn't really have a strong opposition to him. The problems that he will face are problems that we were just discussing with Kazakhstan too, is that they are economic, and if people throughout Russia feel that they are being their standard of living is dropping, and they see that Moscow is this big glittering capital with very, very wealthy people, this creates discontent, and it could spread. And we saw in Khabarovsk in the east, there's been a long-standing sort of demonstrations, but they haven't been ones that reached a critical stage. And the government is very quick to try to address these issues by either lowering prices or accommodating many of the concerns and things of this nature. So there could always be something that could ignite a situation. But at the present moment, I don't see that Vladimir Putin needs this. I think it's also a legacy. It's an issue that if he's leaving office, which may be soon, and that not driven from office, this is one of the key issues that he and Russian leadership have been working or dealing with and trying to get serious traction on from the United States, and that is this security structure in Europe. And I think this is extremely important for his legacy, but I don't think as important for his political well-being, except if they did invade Ukraine big time, then all bets are off, because when things go boom, you never know where they may end up in turn. And just like when Russia entered World War I, with great enthusiasm, it ended up with the end of the Tsarist regime because of the vicissitudes of the moment. So I think that would be a great risk for him, because then Russia would have to pay a price, and he would be held responsible for that by the Russian people and the Russian elite.
I'd like to
follow up.
I'd like to follow up on George's penultimate point, which is during Putin's time in office, he wants to see Russia's sphere of influence returned and recognized, this security architecture. Within Xi's term of office, he wants to see Taiwan made part of the People's Republic of China. I think that these are the two things that, not in 2022, but in the next 5 to 10 years, are really going to be the issues that make the world a very unstable place, and something that we're going to have to focus a great deal of attention on.
Before I turn it back over to Claire, let me ask you what we asked Ambassador John Herpitz last night, and he gave a low percentage on this. What is, in your view, the percentage likelihood that Russia may invade Ukraine, say, within the next 3 months? He said 10 to 15%.
I think it's a low percentage. I just don't see that what they're doing is leading to that. I mean, they want attention. They've been rattling the cages, and they're very good. And Vladimir Putin and the Russian state, these are not big gamblers. They're very careful. Everywhere they have worked, it's always been on the margin, whether it's Syria or Liberal, not with great loss of life. I mean, when they went into Ukraine, it was bloodless. That is in Crimea and the like too. And so they are not big gamblers.
Maybe they learned something after Afghanistan.
Huh?
Afghanistan was a gamble, wasn't it?
Well, when it was the Soviet Union, we're talking about this. That was the Soviet Union. It wasn't Vladimir Putin and the Russian Federation. That was a different country with a different leadership.
David, how do you see it? And we'll close.
If we go by the correct interpretation that Secretary Blinken laid out, which is an incursion is an invasion, then post Beijing Olympics, I put the possibility of an invasion, this 20-mile canal, is very, very high.
Good. Claire?
Thank you so much to each of you, gentlemen. David, Ambassador Krol, and Jim, your expertise and your willingness to share your thoughts and your time with us is greatly appreciated. We welcome all of you to check out our website for upcoming programs, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, George.
Thanks, David.